Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. As you can tell from the title, today I'm hopping on that beauty YouTube trend that's been going around, which is showing you what palettes I would keep if I could only keep 10 palettes. Every time I see an if I could only keep 10 palettes video in my feed, I watch it immediately because I'm always really interested to see what beauty YouTubers' best and top choices of eyeshadow palettes are, because personally I think that's the most fun part of doing my makeup. Eyeshadow palettes are the part of makeup I believe has the most unnecessary excessive options, but also it is the most fun part. The if I could only keep 10 tag is such a beauty community thing because most people like in the working world, don't even own a single eyeshadow palette. And so for a lot of times making these videos, the people are like,
oh my god, it was so hard to choose only 10.
No one needs 10 eyeshadow palettes. But if this is your hobby and this is what makes you happy, then what can I say? If I only had my top 5 palettes, then I would be totally fine to create pretty much any look that I wanted. Now saying that, do I have more than 10 palettes? Do I have twice as much? 3 times as much? Use your imagination. One of these days I'll show you every eyeshadow palette I own. Saying that, I did pick out my top 10 palettes, which are also the same palettes that I would keep if I could only keep 10 palettes. And I will be ranking them today as well, from 10th place to 1st place. So it's like a 2-in-1. So here are my 10 palettes in this box. Sneak peek. You can probably recognize pretty much all of them. But before I go into the top 10 eyeshadow palettes, I did keep this within eyeshadow palettes and not including face palettes. I do have 2 honorable mentions that didn't quite make it for a couple of different reasons. They don't exactly fit into this category. The first honorable mention is the Becca, Chloe, and Malika BFF face palette or something like that, and this is in the lighter variation of the 2, and I am including this as an honorable mention instead of one of the top 10 just because this is a face palette, and I decided to keep this ranking just within eyeshadow palettes. The second honorable mention is this. This is my custom ColourPop palette, and I picked out the 12 single shadows that are included. And I love this palette. Obviously, I created it myself. It's kind of like my baby. So if I were considering this a whole palette, then I would definitely include this in the top 10. However, I think it's a little bit like outside of the category of eyeshadow palettes just because this color scheme wasn't created by a brand themselves. But some of my favorite shades of all time are here. Like the 3 duochromes, which I love, include Glass Bowl, Tea Garden, and Earthshine. Earthshine is also in the It's My Pleasure palette. But anyways, this is my second honorable mention. Now into the top 10, starting from my 10th spot, and that is the Wet n Wild 10 pan eyeshadow palette in the shade Cosmic Collision. This eyeshadow palette is actually a dupe palette for the ABH Prism palette. However, Wet n Wild did add some more mattes to kind of make it easier to create a whole look using just the palette. One complaint with the Anastasia Beverly Hills Prism palette was that the shades included were not very amenable to just using that palette by itself. So in here, this dark green is added to go with the shimmer, and I know for sure that wasn't in the original ABH palette. These 2 transition shades, I think one of them is added by Wet n Wild. I'm not sure which one though. But nonetheless, this is actually the eyeshadow palette I'm wearing on my eyes today, and it gives me such kind of like grungy and very unique looks that I can't get with any of my other palettes. Like this light color, this duochrome here, is very gold, strong in gold reflex. I hope you can see. So in my look, I used this as a transition shade, this to deepen outer crease, the green shimmer across my lid, the blue shimmer as my kind of eyeliner, and then the white gold duochrome on my inner corners, as well as a little bit of a lid topper. So this palette only retails for $4.99, which is already really affordable, but like CVS, Walgreens, Ulta, 20% off coupons, there are so many opportunities to get this for even less than that. And the formula of Wet n Wild, these little 10 pan shadows, I actually think is really, really nice. It blends really easily, they never give me any issues, and other than ColourPop, I think Wet n Wild might actually be my favorite affordable eyeshadow formula. So if you're interested in the Anastasia Beverly Hills Prism and you're interested in this formula, or even if you're not, I really recommend that you try any variation of this out. The My Glamour Squad variation is a shade for shade dupe for Anastasia Beverly Hills Soft Glam, and so if you're interested in that color scheme more, I would recommend picking that up. I might talk a little bit more about that later, wink wink. In 9th place is this. This is a beauty of a palette. A ton of people included it in their best of 2018 makeup favorites, and so this is the Dose of Colors collaboration with Desi and Katie. And so these are the shades included. The shimmers especially have gotten some love from me. And the thing that I think is actually stand out about this palette is the mattes. They are so easy to work with. The shimmers I actually think are a little finicky. They're not my favorite shimmer formula. And I know that a lot of people really love this palette for the shimmers because they are very like reflective and glimmery and jewelry, but they are a little bit glittery as well. However, my favorite shade in this has to be this Dirty Money shade, which is a chartreuse, really like a dirty green gold. And so I've been really into this kind of dirty shade, as you can tell from my eye look. I do think that the shades in here are unique, and I enjoy and use this palette enough for it to warrant being in my 10 palettes that I would keep. So this is palette ranked number 9. Palette number 8 is a little bit of a bougie one, and that is this. This is the Pat McGrath Mothership Sublime Bronze Ambition palette. This is the more neutral variation of the 6-pan palettes. They have one that is more pink and purple, one that is more cool toned, and this one, I'm sure they have more, but I can't remember off the top of my head. So this palette retails for $55, I believe, but I actually got this when it was on sale for $27.50. Would I recommend this palette for $55? Absolutely not. Actually, okay, well, if you have money to spend, I would say the formula really is unlike any other formula I've tried. So this brown in particular is the obvious transition shade choice in this palette, and it blends so seamlessly. And usually powders that blend really well are a little bit powdery, but this is very creamy, very smooth, and somehow it still blends itself out, and it builds really well. So I could like dust this really lightly across my entire lid and then take some more on my outer corner, and it looks like, you know, like I tried really hard, but it was really only this one shade. And the shimmers are incredibly soft as well. And this palette just has everything I need to create a beautiful, seamless, easy, neutral look for work, for dates, for whatever I need to be doing that day. And this dark brown at the bottom actually is a bit of a shimmer, but I use it as a matte to line my eyes or deepen the outer third of my eye. The color payoff is incredible, but also if you accidentally put on too much, it's not gonna give you trouble blending it out. Every time I use this palette, I just really enjoy it. And so that is palette number 8. 7th place is my Juvia's Place The Saharan palette. And these are the shades that are included. I picked this palette because not only do I love the Juvia's Place formula, but I chose this palette in particular over the Saharan 2, which I also have, because I think this offers more variety in tones and shimmers and will give me more options that I don't have in my other palettes that I selected. Here's another one of those dirty greens that I told you about. But also I think my favorite shimmer in here is Zoya, which is this peachy shimmer, and it just looks so smooth. Here for Iman, this is a very stark white shimmer, and it's almost bluey. And these two shimmers right here, Senegal and Zoya, I use them very regularly. I know it barely looks touched because you actually don't need very much of these shadows since they're so pigmented. This is actually my favorite color scheme palette that Juvia's Place has put out. So this is number 7. Palette number 6 is this. This is the ColourPop Sweet Talk palette. And if you haven't seen my ranking all my ColourPop eyeshadow palette ranking video, this palette actually got first place in that. And that is because, you know, a large reason of why I actually like this palette so much is this Super Shock shadow here that I use to top pretty much any look I create with this palette. But yeah, if I'm feeling really like girly and I just want to wear like a cute pink / coral look, then this is what I reach into most of the time. My favorite shade in this palette is Garden Date, which is this peach with a gold flip. So here's that shade. And I just think across the eye, this looks so stunning. So this is the first ColourPop eyeshadow palette I'm mentioning in this video, and as you guys know, I really like the ColourPop eyeshadow formula. It's my top favorite affordable eyeshadow that I would recommend to anybody. Oh, also, if this palette looks different from how you normally see the Sweet Talk palette, it's because I also did replace the 2 pressed glitter eyeshadows with 2 shimmers from my Yes Please palette, just because I never use pressed glitters on my eyes. Okay, now we're in the top 5. So at this point, if I only had these top 5 eyeshadow palettes, I would be totally happy with that. I do love these previous 5 palettes that I mentioned to you. Obviously, as I was describing them, I had hearts in my eyes, but I think this is just for fun, I guess. I don't really need to have 6 through 10, but they do make me happy to touch them and play with them and see the final art and look that comes out of them. However, these though. these are my necessities. The 5th place palette is this. This is the Huda Beauty Smoky Obsessions palette. So this is one of her first 9-pan palettes, and this is what it looks like on the inside. Neutral tones, and if I'm being honest with myself, that's what I wear like 14 out of 15 days. Just because at work I need to look semi-professional because my attending physician's impression of me actually kind of matters a lot, so I can't look too out there. And I actually was going between this palette and the Anastasia Beverly Hills Sultry palette, but there are actually a lot of very, very similar shades between this and the Anastasia Beverly Hills Sultry. Like, it has the perfect transition, a very strong silver shimmer, a black, a deeper brown, a pink shimmer. So honestly, I don't need to even have both of these palettes in my collection. I'm not giving either of them up, but I do think that this palette is a very, very similar dupe to the Anastasia Beverly Hills Sultry palette. I did pick this palette over it, however, because if I have the option and the outcome is exactly the same, I do prefer having smaller palettes. They're just easier for me to hold and they take up less of my space. And yeah, my favorite shade in this palette is actually this top left shimmer. It's like a pink toned taupe bronze. So here it is. Ooh. And this is what I use as a lid shade at least half of the times that I use this palette. Yeah, it's just a staple for me. The 4th place palette is the newest palette to me in my collection, and that is another Huda palette. This is the Huda Nude Light palette. And so this is what it looks like on the inside. And I picked this palette because I do really like the Huda Beauty eyeshadow formula. Plus I like compact eyeshadow palettes like this, as well as the colors in here will really add to the top 10 palettes that I included in this video. So this shimmer, for example, it's similar to some of the other ones in that it has a gold flip to it, and it's just this really beautiful duochrome, but it also has a purple, kind of more purple to it than others. So there it is. So I typically use this as my inner corner highlight, or I drag it across my lower lash line, or I use it as a brightening color for my lid. And I just really don't have any other eyeshadow like this. And so that shade is actually a big reason why I chose this palette to be in my top 10. But aside from that, this palette has everything I need to create a very kind of soft, fairy, ethereal look, and makes me feel girly and pretty. So if I like the way this makes me feel, I'd like to keep using it. So the 3rd place eyeshadow palette of mine is, by no surprise, the Jackie Aina eyeshadow palette in collaboration with Anastasia Beverly Hills. And so this is that palette. I'm sure all of you have seen this palette by now, and it just has some very unique shades. So many of these tones, it looks like there are a lot of different tones in here, but they all work really well together. I never have to dip into a different palette to complete a look with this, and every time I use it, it just looks incredible. I think this palette has the best formula that Anastasia Beverly Hills has come out with to date. So only good things to say. Also, I love duochromes, and this has 2 incredible duochromes, which is Sponsored and Trust Issues. Trust Issues is actually very similar to the Wet n Wild duochrome I showed you earlier because it has a very strong gold reflex. So, number 3. Now I'm gonna give you a moment to think about what 2 eyeshadow palettes do you think I included in my top 2. All right, let me know if you got it right. So in 2nd place, I have the ColourPop So Jaded palette. And here she is. She's a beauty, as always, and forever will be. Also note that I did switch out these 2 shades. Originally there were 2 pressed glitters there, but I swapped them out with a couple shades from the ColourPop Blue Moon eyeshadow palette. So this palette, within my 10 palettes, will satisfy every colorful need that I have. Even though I get dolled up super pretty for videos and I like filming fun, colorful looks, I don't wear color that often. So I don't need to have 5 out of my 10 eyeshadow palettes be colorful. This one really hits all those marks for me because if I do use color, I want it to look like, I already used the word ethereal, but that's really like the vibe I'm going for a lot. And here's another green gold shimmer. This palette also has a pan of Super Shock eyeshadow, and I use that to top my lid pretty much with any look I make with this palette, as Kathleen Lights does herself. And yeah, whenever I look at this palette, I'm never not inspired. So this palette is definitely a must-have for me. It's my favorite ColourPop purchase this entire year to date. And actually, since buying this eyeshadow palette, it's really curbed my craving for more palettes because I'm like, why would I buy that? I already have this one. Now, are you ready? My number 1 top eyeshadow palette, if I could only keep 10 palettes, is the Anastasia Beverly Hills Soft Glam eyeshadow palette. And this palette is my staple of staples. So these are the tones that I create my looks with 9 out of 10 days, 10 out of 10 days. So my two general go-to looks include a neutral eye with a neutral shimmer on the lid, or a pinky neutral eye with a bit of a more girly vibe. So look at this palette. Not only do I think the color scheme is perfect for me, perfect for a lot of the average consumers, this is the #1 palette I would recommend if you have the money to invest. But yeah, anytime I pick up this palette, it's virtually impossible for me to come out with a look that I don't like. So my #1 ride or die, can't live without palette is this. Now, a little bit of a caveat. I told you before that the Wet n Wild 10 pan eyeshadow palette in the shade My Glamour Squad is a shade for shade dupe of this palette. And actually, before I bought this palette, I was using the Wet n Wild palette to get the same kind of looks. But like I said, the 10 pan eyeshadow palettes from Wet n Wild perform beautifully. Let me go grab it. So here's that palette I was telling you about. Now let me just hold these up for you side by side. So here they are. If you are tight on money and can't afford this, or if you're considering buying it and you really should not be buying it, try this out. No one besides you is gonna know or care that you used a more affordable palette versus a fancy schmancy one. Whether you use this palette or this palette, your look is going to be the same. Maybe the experience of touching it and doing it would be a little bit different, but if you are gonna put yourself in trouble buying a more expensive palette, you really don't need to. Dogs are barking in the background, the sun is set, kids are playing outside, so it's time for me to wrap up this video. If you have a ride or die palette, or even 2 or 3 ride or die palettes, let me know what they are in the comments. I'm always interested, obviously, because I always click on these videos to see what other people are loving in this fun and colorful and eclectic category of makeup that is eyeshadow. I had a lot of fun choosing these palettes and planning out this video, so I hope it was helpful to you, whether it was to plan purchases or even just for entertainment purposes. So before you go about the rest of your day, I wanted to tell you that y'all are my treasure, and remember to find beauty in every day, and most importantly, be kind to yourself. I'll see you in my next video. Bye!
Let's go have some fun.